Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sika Stand. Today we're talking about possibly the biggest doping case in recent years that was covered up. So you may have missed this. While it's a very large event in the world of sports, it has gotten moderate exposure across the social medias, and it's in relation to WADA covering up 23 positive tests from Team China. So let's cover the details really quickly and get to the point. Prior to Tokyo Olympics, 23 swimmers tested positive for a drug known as TMZ or trimetazidine. We'll get to what that does in just a minute. They tested positive for trimetazidine. This was during intense lockdowns during the C word in China. These athletes tested positive for this drug. WADA were like, hey, what's the story? Where did this come from? Chinese officials and security did the investigation and said that this was present in a hotel that the athletes were staying in. It was contaminated in their food, and that's what caused these 23 athletes to test positive for this drug. That's what happened. WADA concluded that there was no ill done. It was incidental ingestion. They read the report and said all was fine. Some of these athletes went on to win medals at the Tokyo Olympics. Now, if that sounds a little bit strange to you, it is. It is incredibly strange in comparison to what's happening and what would normally happen when WADA have an athlete test positive. Now, I do want to say one thing before we go any further. You might think of making this to be like, oh, China bad, China doping. We're beyond that. That stage is over. That's something from 10, 15 years ago. If you hold that opinion that individual nation or athletes are terrible for doping, you have not been paying attention, or you might not know a whole lot about elite sport. What is hilarious here is the antics of WADA. In this case, when an athlete normally tests positive, they are provisionally banned. If a sample shows up that something is in their sample, a banned substance, whatever it might be, they are banned temporarily. And until the due process is completed, they are banned and not allowed in competition. This information is made public. You can go to the International Testing Agency's website currently, and you can see a list of names shown when they were tested positive and when the conclusion was made. Very often this takes years, takes a very long time. All of this was wrapped up very quickly with these Chinese athletes. Now, in the case where incidental ingestion is truly what happened, WADA almost always still bans those athletes because the tagline from WADA is you are responsible for what's in your body. If you've ever done any WADA educational courses as a coach or an athlete, it always comes down to you are responsible for what's in your body. When you fill out those forms, you're making declaration of supplements you take, and it's up to you to make sure you are taking supplements that are not contaminated. Now, whether that happens as frequently as athletes say it does is another story, but long story short, WADA very rarely, I mean 99 times out of 100, an athlete will still get banned. Now, in the cases where it's proven that it was incidental ingestion, where they will go and buy an independent sample and test that sample, and they'll say, oh, look, that athlete actually did incidentally ingest it, they will give them a reduced ban. For example, we have athletes testing positive for contaminated supplements. Not many, but it has happened very infrequently. And that athlete was still banned. They were still banned temporarily while the process went on. When the conclusion was made, they still get banned. And in the cases where it's very unclear what's happening, and even some cases where an athlete has provided that supplement and it's shown to be contaminated, WADA very often not believe that athlete and still ban them. So in this case, this was not reported publicly. This was taken at face value. The athletes were not provisionally banned, and then they were not given a reduced ban. They were given no ban and allowed to compete at the Olympics. Now, when it comes to China and when it comes to anti-doping, this isn't the first time athletes have tested for trimetazidine. So TMZ is the abbreviation you're probably seeing in other places. Essentially what trimetazidine is a heart medication generally used for treatment of angina, and a Chinese swimmer tested positive for this a couple of years ago and was given an 8-year ban. Now, trimetazidine is quite interesting because there's a study out of Poland who looked at the application of trimetazidine in healthy populations. It was a systematic review. 2 different studies from 2017 and 2019 were analysed. They were given to healthy population of individuals, not athletes, and probably not at the doses athletes were taking. But interestingly enough, they found there was no increase in physical performance, post-exercise recovery, or health parameters. Now, that's not to say a larger dose in an athletic population would see a change, but that is quite interesting in regards to the use of trimethazidine. Be that as it may, it's a banned substance, and as a result, testing positive for a banned substance should result at least in a provisional ban. Now, I don't particularly think that, I don't care that China tested positive. I'm not boo China here. I don't think that anyone is very innocent in a lot of elite sports, and we have like the head of the US anti-doping agency saying that this is terrible and how bad it is, and but then at the same time US are winning the most amount of gold medals at the Olympics. And I think that kind of prevailing atmosphere is changing. We have the potential advent of the enhanced games next year in Australia. Again, whether that will happen or not, the fact that people have a growl for that, whether because it receives so much attention, lets people know that the prevailing thought process around anti-doping and doping in sports could be changing a little bit. And I think most people are starting to realize that the vast majority of at least winners at the Olympics, if not more, have used or are using some form of banned substance. In weightlifting, we kind of acknowledge it. We kind of understand that no one's really naive to it in weightlifting too much. Some newer individuals might be for a little bit, but the longer you're around the sport of Olympic weightlifting, the more you realize what really happens. Other sports, the larger they get, are a little bit more naive. The less you do as an individual, less you do the sport as an individual, a little bit more removed you are from that side of things, and the less you see the prevalence of doping in your particular sport that you're watching. So, a lot of people are upset. Lots of swimmers are upset. Lots of people have come out saying how incorrect this is, how this is against WADA's policy. And this is what I think is a problem here. Is it's not so much that what we can probably guess is these individual athletes were using trimethazidine as a form of performance enhancing drug, but it's when the adjudicator, WADA, the person who is supposed to be making sure that everyone plays fair when something comes to their attention, you are banned or you are given a slap on the wrist or you are punished for your actions. And if you get caught, normally what happens is we've got chemistry, bribery, in different cases, individual bribing of doping officers. But when we have a systemic infiltration and corruption of that testing agency, of that adjudicator, of the entirety of WADA when this decision was made, it feels just kind of like the whole thing is almost pointless in some regards. When we have this case where it's not your own individual merits, and while they might still be cheating, those particular merits that you're doing, your chemistry, your resources, your small-scale bribing of people, and I know you're looking at this thinking, that isn't that crazy, but that's what we've experienced so far. But in some way, and you might call me crazy for saying this, but in some way, this is still a skill-based avoidance of those tests. While it might be a chemist or political maneuvering, it is still a somewhat skill-based adjudication of those tests or avoidance of those tests. But when it comes to just sheer corruption and blatant cover-up from the whole adjudicator, the big dog, the judge that's supposed to be making sure that everyone at least appears to be playing fair on the surface just goes, nah, it's fine. That's when it really feels like, oh, what the fuck is going on here? So, trimethazidine, China, anti-doping, scandals. It's crazy what we're living in. And thought you might bring this to your attention. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Again, I don't care. We always say this. We'd be hypocritical of us to say this, that we'd actually care that the Chinese athletes were doping. What I think is quite significant in this is the large brush with which WADA has said, look, that's cool. And kudos to the New York Times, who brought this to the attention of the public with a German broadcasting agency who were the ones involved in exposing a lot of the corruption in the International Weightlifting Federation. So quite interesting in that regard. So they brought it to public's attention, and here we are. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and let me know your thoughts below.